Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome and welcome back to my channel. Okay, in this video today, we are going to be talking about 2022 interior design trends that I'm not excited about. So this is a completely subjective list. Let's get that right out of the way quickly, right? Like the last interior design trend video for 2022 video that I did was a little bit more objective. I mean, as objective as I kind of get on this channel, which is not actually all that objective at all, but whatever. So this is a subjective list. This is just the stuff that I'm not really excited about. Just because I don't like it or I'm not really excited about it doesn't mean that maybe you're not excited about it, right? You do you, and you put in your home whatever you like. This is just my own list of the trends that I'm seeing that I'm just not really jazzed about. And I'm going to kind of go into some detail of why I'm not excited about them and maybe why I think these are worth a skip for this year. Also, I will say next week I have a video coming out where I talk about my favorite trends of 2022. These are my personal faves, so look forward to that next week. Okay, so first 2022 interior design trend I'm not excited about is going to be the all brown, all neutral kids rooms. So these are these spaces that people are designing for babies, like nurseries or whatever, but then even some older children as well, where you have these like all neutral, all cream, all beige, mostly beige and brown sort of rooms for their kids. So what's driving this, I think, is really two things. So first of all, you've got parents, I think, really wanting to sort of carry the color palette from other areas of the home and maybe that style into these kids rooms, right? So, you know, this warm palette that we're seeing, this trend that we're seeing for a little couple of years now of this movement towards warmer colors, these warmer neutral tones, maybe this sort of warm minimalism is being done in other areas of the home. And people are saying, well, you know what? I kind of want something that's similar carried through into the kids room. So I really understand why people are going for that. And the second thing really is just people wanting to move away from like the really, really obnoxious cacophony of color that oftentimes is associated with kids rooms. And I totally understand that. And again, like I'm not giving parenting advice. Like if there's one thing I know about parents that you love, it's getting parenting advice from people that don't have children. Am I right? Like I'm pretty sure you all love that. But I will say sometimes these kids rooms are obnoxiously loud and very colorful and kind of overwhelming and maybe a bit overstimulating. Like if it's overstimulating to me, I imagine it's overstimulating to a 5-year-old. So I do understand why people are moving away from sort of those really bright colorful plastics, more towards sort of wood tones and sort of like kind of nice simple Montessori sort of style things for their kids. So I understand where those two things are coming from, bringing that color palette into the space while also looking more towards natural things. But here's why I'm not really a big fan of it. And that is because this particular trend seems very driven by boring brown spaces. And I just think for kids specifically, they need a little bit of personality and color, maybe a little bit into their home. I don't think you need to do it in big, loud, obnoxious ways to have a really great impact. I mean, some of these spaces, right? Like, I mean, you look here, you've got this like brown bed and you've got like, I mean, this is drab, you guys. Like I've seen like Soviet era prison cells that have more personality and are a little bit more comfortable than these. I mean, some of these spaces are just drab and boring. And I just think kids of all things, like by definition, a kid's room should be a little bit playful. And I'm just thinking these really heavy sort of drab, colorless spaces are just not something that I'm really excited to see for kids rooms. I'm gonna show you some examples here of some spaces that are fairly neutral, but I do think they have little pops of color, whether that's coming from really pretty wallpaper, maybe it's coming from just like some really sort of desaturated or toned down colors in some of their kids' toys, where I think you can create a space that is beautiful, that isn't obnoxiously loud, while not necessarily being really brown and drab and boring. Like add a little bit of color. Like if your kid goes to school and makes some art project that I'm assuming you're like proud of or something, like maybe put that on a wall. Like, I don't know. I'm not telling you what your kid's into. Like what, do your kids interested in comic books anymore? Like, I don't know. Put stuff in there that reflects the personality of your child. This is just so obviously driven by parents and just so not driven by the children. I do think like with a nursery, you can get away with things because like babies don't really have a personality, right? Like whatever. But once they get a little bit older, maybe give them the space to show a little bit of their personality. And I just don't think you're doing it with this really heavy drab brown stuff. You know? Okay, next interior design trend for 2022 I'm not excited for is Squiggle Things. This is driven by the postmodern trend that I talked about in my 2022 interior design style video, and I'm going to be doing a video upcoming on postmodern, which I'm not a postmodern person. Like I just don't really love it. I think it's quite well documented on this channel. I typically like modern things. I don't like a lot of this sort of driven towards let's go really kooky crazy and sacrifice form in the process. So a lot of these squiggle things are just really kind of annoying to me. I'm I'm all for a graceful curve, right? Give me a lamp with a graceful curve, like that's cool. Like I'm okay with some curves. Curves are a beautiful shape, but when they just become unnecessary squiggles, personally, I'm out. So where are we seeing this, right? We're seeing this in things like decor pieces, like candles. We're seeing this in like lamps. You're seeing like floor lamps, table lamps, doesn't matter. They all get it. That mirror, of course, that we've seen, which is a classic postmodern design that you just see over and over again. It kind of looks like a hair flip. You know what I'm talking about? Like we've seen that 100 times. I just don't really like these. I just think they're a little bit obnoxious, a little bit overdone and unnecessary in my opinion. But I say that as a person who just has a love of modern design. So if you love postmodern, then maybe this is okay for you. I do think, I love the sentiment of postmodern design trying to mix things up. Like I do agree that, okay, fine, some modern stuff can be a little bit drab and boring. Like I get it. We've all seen the same sort of like West Elm chairs 100 times. You've even seen them here in my background in my own living room. But you know what? Like I love it, but I get that people are a little bit bored of it and a little bit tired of it and they're looking for something a little bit new. I do think postmodern, kind of like it did back in the day, is sort of able to do that again. It sort of refreshes some sort of modern styles in sort of really interesting ways. And I get that. But the squiggle mirrors and the squiggle things, I just think it looks really juvenile and really kind of annoying. I would say sure in a teenager's room, like sure the Gen Zs will toss them this one. Like if you want to throw in your squiggle things, that's cool. It's just not for me and not really getting me jazzed for 2022, I'll be honest. Okay, next up, we're continuing with our postmodern trend with ugly furniture. Now, if you know, I actually don't really like to use the word ugly because even though obviously I'm quite judgmental, at the same time, I just find that it's not particularly helpful and I rather say that things are just not for me. But the reason I'm gonna call this category ugly furniture is because this is not my word. You're seeing like Architectural Digest and all these different articles using the word ugly furniture as kind of a category of this trend. So it's not me, it's them. They're using the word ugly, so I'm gonna stick with it. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about the Bellini sofa. I'm talking about all these weird, kooky, crazy sofas that, you know, were very popular decades ago. And now with this trend towards postmodern, they are showing up in stores near you. And you're seeing more of these over and over and over again. I'm noticing people are taking like sort of a modern sofa, but then they're doing like a really kooky, crazy postmodern sofa to try to like change it up and keep it interesting. I just think these are usually too weird for me, you guys. Like the Bellini sofa just looks like a bunch of hot dog buns that's been strapped together. Do you know what I mean? Like that's kind of my own personal take. Now I get it. It's a beautiful, you know, Be Italia. They've made some, you know, really fantastic, amazing furniture over the years and really pushed the boundaries, and wonderful brand that has really done amazing work, and the designer is fabulous, and I get all that. It's just not for me. I just don't really like it. I get it. I understand it's actually very comfortable. I have sat on it many times. It is a very comfortable sofa, more comfortable than you think, by the way. It kind of feels a little bit like a bouncy castle that you're gonna fly out of, but actually it's reasonably comfortable. I wouldn't say it's like take a nap worthy, but you know, it's a reasonably comfortable sofa. And you know, some people really love it. It's sort of interesting. It's become like this sort of statement piece in your home. I understand why people are excited for it, but some of these pieces, I mean, that one's maybe passable depending on if you want to like build your whole room around it. But some of these pieces are just absolutely terrible in my opinion. Like these, there's a reason why we left these years ago. Like there's a reason why they weren't good then, and we're bringing them back now. And I just don't really think that we need these ugly sofa and ugly furniture pieces back in our lives. So yes, I'm a modernist. I'm an older millennial modernist who still likes his classic modern pieces, and you'll just have to kind of pry these boring old sofas out of my cold dead hands because I don't really like these really ugly, architecturally weird, funky pieces that I just think are trying too hard to look interesting rather than just building a really beautiful, cohesive home that you actually want to spend time in, which is what I personally like to think about when I think about interior design, not weird pieces that make a statement, but not the right one, in my opinion. Okay, next up, interior design trends 2022 is going to be cottagecore, which you know I don't really like. You know what number 5 is, by the way, now that I've mentioned cottagecore. We'll get there. Cottagecore. So here's the thing. We've all been at home for the last couple of years, ready to climb the walls. We're not feeling it. We've had a rough couple of years, right? We've had a rough go. And I think people have really wanted to go back to this time, this like agrarian period where life was great and, you know, you could just live on a farm or like at a cottage, maybe in the woods, and you could just like turn off the news. There wasn't 24/7 CNN in the background, right? We didn't have to listen to the news. news, because there was none. You just sat there and you just like, your life was just about feeding your chickens, and you felt like, oh, life was simple back then. I mean, you know, except for like the dysentery and all the other problems that we had back then, but apart from that, oh, life was good, wasn't it? And I think that's really what people are looking for, is that sort of creating that space that maybe feels really home. It has that sort of country, cottagey vibe, and so they just like stuff their house full of a bunch of mushrooms, which, can I just say, what's with mushrooms? Like, why are you also obsessed with the mushrooms? Everything, well, not now, watch the end of the video, but then go to Etsy, type in Cottagecore, and if you can't find 4 out of 5 items have a mushroom on it, like, I don't know what's with the toadstools and the mushrooms, but for some reason, the Cottagecore people, they just want to live a life where they just forage for mushrooms all day. So here's the thing, when you incorporate that into a design style, I think there's some that are reasonably successful because they maybe kind of err on a timeless, sort of rustic sort of thing, but it's all very authentic. And I think if you incorporate some of those authentic pieces into your home and mix it in with some modern styles, because again, we do have things like electricity and television and stuff that we actually like in our modern times. So just like try to be as authentic, but mix in with some modern pieces. Maybe then you can arrive at something that is reasonably successful while it's like cottagecore light. But this idea of just, you know, throwing a bunch of mushrooms in a gallery, I pick on the mushrooms, but honestly, guys, it's a lot of mushrooms, where everything is just so country and so Little House on the Prairie. It just sometimes doesn't, I think, really fit with the modern space that you're actually living in. It's kind of like a little bit of my beef that I've had with Farmhouse maybe for a little while now. There's just a missing piece of authenticity. Maybe see my fixing Farmhouse video and maybe we can fix Cottagecore. I don't know. It's not a look I'm excited about, I'll be honest. It's not something that I really enjoy because I just think it's a little bit heavy-handed with this charm that might be charming to some, but I just don't think is really reflective of real life in 2022. Okay, and then fifth up, of course, we've got to talk about, you knew it was coming, is Grand Millennial. So Grand Millennial is a trend that apparently people said at the beginning of 2022 was a thing. I didn't believe them. I sort of feel a little bit vindicated that it's not really a thing, but apparently it's a thing, and I'm just gonna talk about why I don't really like it. Grand Millennial, okay, there are some people, kind of like with Cottagecore, there's some ways that you can really do it. I do like this idea of taking vintage or traditional pieces and bringing them back. Much has been said, of course, that I'm not a big fan of traditional necessarily. I do like some traditional elements, and I do see the beauty in traditional design, and I do admire sort of the courage of taking some of these traditional pieces and mixing in lots of different colors and lots of different fabrics and lots of different interesting things and smushing them all together and calling it Grand Millennial. I do understand where it's coming from. I think it's sort of an interesting trend. And again, I like this movement towards like, hey, how can we sort of reclaim traditional and sort of bring it forward into something really new and interesting? I just think for me, it's usually a lot of color and a lot of pattern that's mixed in together with a lot of detail. And that's just not something that I'm really, really excited about. It's not a particular look that I really enjoy, but I do understand why a lot of people like it. I think, in my opinion, it is at its most successful, again, when the mixing of patterns is sort of maybe a little bit pared down. I'm not quite sure that like pretty little wallpaper with like hummingbirds on it next to leopard print is necessarily something that is always going to work in a lot of people's homes. It's really difficult to pull off. As I said, I don't think anybody or many people really have. I would rather see this move into a more traditional direction that we have seen, you know, 100 times, rather than sort of this Instagram chic version where we have taken a whole bunch of different patterns and colors and thrown it together. So I don't know, I'm not really a big fan of it. I do think a maximalist style, which you could argue there's some very subtle differences and a lot of overlap between these three, but I would say a maximalist style oftentimes has more storytelling in my experience, and I do think it brings together things a little bit more successfully than this Grand Millennial, which I just think it feels like a really narrow niche of a design style. I just feel like it's usually a bit cluttered, a bit busy, and just too much of everything for me, and that's why I'm not really excited about it. Okay, that's it for me for today, you guys. I'm gonna link back here to my 2022 interior design trend video, so some of these things sort of might make an appearance there, so they are trends, even if I don't really care for them, but you can get a good feel for what's coming in the future. And, you know, stay tuned for next week where I'm going to talk about trends for 2022 that I actually do really like.